Folks that you were visiting in the new running water, I can remember when we had running water. We had run and get it. My wife came in, we did get an opportunity to introduce her. Susan is here, and I'm gonna spend a few minutes talking about, can you hear me? Is this?
You might try to move forward, closer to you. Oh, there you
How
go.
about that?
Oh,
Is that better?
yes.
I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the Collinwood House, and as Olin said, it's the oldest house in Plano, and we think it's the oldest house in Collin County. The house was built in 1953, I believe it was the date that it was built, and it was built about 1853. I'm sorry. I need help. So as I make mistakes going through, correct me, please. 1853, and it's only about half a mile from. I think most of you here know where the party barn is. Is that pretty good landmark to use for an indicator? About a half a mile where the party barn is. My family came here in 1856. My great-great-grandfather and his son, C.S. Haggard, which the Haggard Middle School is named, Haggard School is named after. At that point in time, C.S. Haggard was 16 years of age. And they actually settled right across the road from where the party barn is. There's a house on the east side of Parkwood, is where they settled in 1856. In 1857, because there was no water at that location, and I'll stop and talk about some other families as I go forward. The Wells family, for an example. The Wells family settled over on Coit Road. Their problem wasn't water, they didn't have any woods. And of course, what they burned for their fireplaces and for their cooking was wood. So they came out to our place, or to the Haggard place, to get wood to go burn. So I'll intervene as I go forward and talk about some of the families. But in 1857, my great-great-grandfather and his son moved down to the Collinwood House. The Collinwood House was not on White Rock Creek, it's on a tributary of White Rock Creek. And if you go down Windhaven today, before you get to Spring Creek, there is a bridge there, and that's the creek the house they moved down to. They bought a little farm that came with it, and somebody after the meeting was over last week said, "How did your family acquire so much farmland during that tenure?" And as you listen to me today, I will explain how that happened. My great-great-grandfather only lived a couple of years after they came to Texas. Then that left my great-grandfather, who was 16 years old at the time. He married a Lunsford. The Lunsford family was an older family that was here in Plano, and I don't know of any members of the Lunsford family that may be still living. But they married Lunsford, and they had 9 kids.
Wow.
And 9 kids were raised in this house, the Collinwood House. And I'm gonna call some names and go through them. I can't name all 9 of them. I got 2 that I cannot name. But my grandfather was one of them. W.O. Haggard, Aunt Annabelle Aldrich. Aunt Annabelle Aldrich was the one who inherited the land where the Collinwood farm is when my great-grandfather passed away. She inherited, and she retained ownership for a number of years. Nanny Bishop was another one of the kids. Most of you know Gladys Harrington. Nanny Bishop was Gladys Harrington's mother, just to make acquaintances. There was Uncle John Haggard. John Haggard was the father of Clint Haggard, Ray Haggard, Walter Deary Haggard, or Doc Haggard, and Martha Kate Allen. And I know probably most of you don't remember those, unless I see a couple of people nodding their heads that you remember them. But they owned the land. those five kids owned the land basically where EDS is today. I lost the name. Anyhow, that land was put together when Ross came in to put up EDS. And those 5 kids and their siblings own most of the land where EDS is today. Ain't Molly Shepherd, going to reference the jockey lot in Plano. I see again a nod or 2. The jockey lot is basically where David McCall's Plaza is today. And the jockey lot was a place on Saturdays where all the farmers came in with their chickens and their goats and their horses and their mules and their eggs and their butter, and set up on the jockey lot, and they traded. And that was interesting. During that point in time, most all communities had something similar to this, a jockey lot. There was one big one in McKinney that I remember going to on a Saturday. But nearly every Saturday, all the farmers from around the area would come in, and they would trade for commodities that they needed. Trade their animals, their livestock, their butter, their eggs, their milk, whatever they had for sugar and spices and flour and all those things that they needed. The jockey lot, I'd say named Molly Shepherd, the Shepherd Mule Barn. Now, when my grandparents came to, they were mule traders. Of course, there was no such thing as tractors and horses, plows and cars at a point in time. It was a horse and buggy days, and they were mule traders. So mules were used for the farming operation. And the Shepherd Mule Barn, I don't know, Jamie, you remember the Shepherd Mule Barn?
The name?
You remember the name? Okay. The Shepherd Mule Barn was about the middle of the jockey lot. Just maybe a couple buildings down where Randy's office is today.
There's a plaque in front of my building there about the Shepherd Mule Barn.
Shepherd Mule Barn. But again, it was a place where they had mules to trade, and that's what the farmers had to use to plow their fields with. They used the mules. The Shepherd Ranch is basically where at Preston and Park today, the southwest corner of it was the Shepherd Ranch, which was the same Shepherd family. As you can tell now, we've got 9 kids, and each of those 9 kids now has, we mentioned Uncle John Haggard, he had 4 or 5, and the Shepherd family, I'm not sure how many kids, offsprings there were from the Shepherd family, but because of the numbers of kids, as I said, the question was asked me, how did you put together the masses of land that the Haggard family had? A farm back in that time when you were farming with mules was only about 100 to 125, maybe 150 acres at the most. But you take the number of kids and multiply that times 150 acres, that's lots of land.
Yeah.
So, and then my grandfather was W.O. Haggard. Can remember growing up and with the farms that he had, and I'm getting off the Collinwood farm, but I'll get back to it in a minute. Each year he had sharecroppers, and each year when the sharecroppers would bring their rent to him, the first thing he did was go out and find another 100, 125, 150 acres. So that happened time after time, and that kind of puts together, kind of tells you the story of how each of the, how many we talking about, 15, 20 kids put together the masses of land that the Haggards owned. The Collinwood house, I was not too familiar with the Collinwood house. I knew that there was history with the family in the Collinwood house. I didn't know why there was history until like a couple, 3, 4 years ago when we really got to digging into when the city of Plano bought it, and all of a sudden we found out it's a historical house. It's probably the oldest house in Plano or even in Collin County. And then our family donated some money to do an architectural study and a historical study of the house, and I guess at that point in time, I learned more about the house than I'd ever known before. But the house pretty well remained intact from the time it was built. It has been modernized. It's got sheetrock on the walls. It's got, of course, you got the electrical. Back when the house was built, it probably had Delco. There was no such thing as electricity in the country. Our first electricity that I can remember when growing up was in 1933 when Denton County Electric came in and brought electricity to the rural parts of Collin County.
What year was that?
1933.
Wow.
1933. I'm sorry? Delco? A generator. It's a generator, and again, visions I go back because I've had family members and friends that I visited that were not as fortunate to get the electricity at the same time, so they still were on Delco. And what the generator is, you got a stage of batteries that are out in the part of the smokehouse or in one of the back sheds, and you got a gasoline engine or a cool oil engine that runs, and The one I can remember, it stands out in my mind, is kind of an old water cooled engine. Actually, the radiator or the water that was preserved in the engine was just in an open container. And when the engine was running, the water was splashing out of it. But they would run those generators and charge the batteries, and then the batteries, of course, furnished electricity for the few light bulbs that they might have in the house, no refrigeration. Let's go back to the Collinwood house again. After we discovered that there was a historical value in the Collinwood house, and again, the city of Plano, the historical committee, and Candace and her group, and a lot of individuals said, look, we need to save it. Let's keep it where it is. Let's restore it and keep it on the farm, on the Collinwood farm where it is. But I'm not sure what politically happened over the years, but finally, I think it's about 3 years this went on, but the city council finally said, let's just put it to a vote and let's see that was appropriate about $3 million, and let's restore it and keep it there. I think the vote was 49 to 51. It failed by two points, as I remember. So I think the significance of the Collinwood house kind of alerted some folks maybe at City Hall, and I'm not always anybody here at City Hall that was involved at the time. I don't see anybody today, but they saw the need to preserve it. So they went through a transition period. It was first talked about maybe we should restore it where it is. Then it was talked about moving it over to Alma and Park. I don't know where you know where the Alma Park, that's my aunt's place that she sold to the city several years ago. It's going to be a park site, so they're going to move it over to that park site. Why they were going to move it to that park site and not keep it on this park site, I don't understand, but that was what took place. And then after that didn't work, finally the city said, okay, let's just do an RFP and let's see where we can go with the Collinwood house. And of course, my family, especially the younger generation, those of us, my brother and sister and I, we were excited about it, but we also know the expense and the work that we're getting ready to incur by taking the house. But the kids wanted to put an RFP in, so we did. Went down to look at the house, and again, I'll talk to Candace, but Candace, how many people were down that day? There's probably 50 people down looking at the house today that had the RFP, and so my son Clint submitted an RFP that we would take the house. But I said, there's going to be a lot of other people, and maybe it's getting ready to go somewhere where they'll do something really, really good with it real quick. And when it turned out, we were the only ones that submitted an RFP. So we inherited the Collinwood house. And then back in October, you were referencing the move of the Collinwood house, and I've never seen as many news people and news media in my life as there was. There's probably 3 or 4 helicopters that flew over the site all during the day. We hired a firm out of Billy Lemons, who's somebody that we've done business with before and moved a couple of houses for us, to come move the house. And the first question I asked him, how you gonna cut it in 2? He said, no, we're not gonna cut it in 2. Well, they jacked it up, and when they jacked it up, and I have never seen them move a house with a fireplace in it. But they actually kept the concrete fireplace. See, the fireplace was on beams or piers. They cut the piers off level with the ground, put the beams under the concrete, and jacked it up with the house. So the house, when they put it on wheels, the fireplace was still sitting in it, the original fireplace, and it's got a marker in it that's been there for years and years and years. And as I said, it was a busy day or fun day. The day they moved the house from down on the tributary of White Rock Creek up to our place, which was about maybe a mile because they went up Spring Creek and moved it. But lots of news media. When they got to the curb to pull it in on our place, the drive shaft on the truck broke. So at that point in time, we had to call on the farm tractors to come help it. So we put two of our biggest tractors on the house, and it was interesting to see those tractors pulling, the tires spinning, but it still couldn't move the house. And he had to go get his dozer and put on behind it. So we had two of my largest tractors and a dozer on behind that pushed the house up to where it's sitting now. Now, I don't know how many of you have been down Parkwood and see our mobile home. It's still on wheels. But from here, what our plans are, we're going to move it up The party barn is going on the east side of the road. There's my dad's house where I was born and raised, and there's a pink barn that's there. The Collinwood house is going to be put between that house and the barn. We are putting it on a concrete foundation. We have had an architect out and in the process of looking at what we need to do to restore it, just to preserve it. Now, our plans are to mothball it. When I say mothball it, that may be for a year, it may be for 10 years, it may be for 20 or 30 years, but at some point in time, we know the farm's going to develop. We know that's going to happen. It's inevitable. And I said, I got dirt on my fingernails. I don't want to see that happen, but it's going to happen. And so our plans is to incorporate it in whatever development takes place, and hopefully making a museum out of it, or an event center, or something that will make the development we do have character. We want it to have character. Now, that's what our plans are. But because we're setting it where we are, the building that's immediately adjacent to it is the old Barksdale School. I have to tell you who the old Barksdale School is. The Barksdale School used to be, it's almost where Brinker is today. The Brinker Elementary School is today. The Barksdale School was a one-room school building that went through the 6th grade. And the year I started the school, the Barksdale School District consolidated with the Plano Independent School District. And so at that point in time, the Barksdale School was no longer needed for a school. And so because my family had donated the land reverted back to the family, and my dad bought the school building from the Plano Independent School District, and we moved it, and that is the barn that's just to the west of my dad's house, the pink barn that you see. In the center of that barn is the old school, and we put shed rooms off of it for the livestock, and that's where I had my show animals when I was in high school, showing calves and hogs and FFA. When we had the architects out and they were looking at the Collinwood house about 3 weeks ago, they accidentally went into the old school building when we weren't down there. And that's all they could talk about. They had more interest in the Barksdale School and what they could do with it than we do the Collinwood house. So because of the relationship of the Barksdale School and the Collinwood house and the historical value of both of them, I don't know that this will happen, but I say it's highly likely that Collinwood house will remain next to the Barksdale School. And at some point in time, the funds will be available to put those back in terms of museum or event center or something along those lines. Did I get through all the family members a while ago? I think I did, but that pretty well tells you the history of the Collinwood house and where it is and what the intent is for us going forward. It's a beautiful house. It's well preserved. As I said, it's been modernized. It's got sheetrock in it, which we'll have to take the sheetrock off the wall and go back to the board and batten that used to hang the canvas and the paper on back during the days. It's going to be a fun project for us to do it at some point in time. I'll stop there and we'll talk about the Collinwood house. If you got questions you want to ask, if you want me to take my family and go on forward with it, I'll be happy to do that. Okay.
Rollins, were you able to save anything out of the basement? The beams or?
Basically, the beams under the house are hand-hewn beams. They use an axe and they've taken a tree and done it. And yes, they're all still under it. Jamie? Yes.
What kind of wood was used, like, for the beams and stuff underneath?
I don't think it was board. No, I think it's going to. It may be a cypress, because that's what the siding is on it. The siding on the house is cypress siding, and of course it's shiplap, what it looks like, and that's one of the problems we're going to have. The siding is covered with shingles, and when we start taking the shingles off, the siding is well preserved. But we do know that when we take some of the shingles off, that there is going to be some siding that we cannot restore. And in order to put that siding back on it, you have to have it milled. So, but you can still get it. You can have it milled and get it. Yes, Nancy.
Mark Bowe with Barnwood Builders, which is on HGTV.
Mm-hmm.
We ought to engage him in this. He's already starting to move an operation into Texas. And he has all this historical knowledge of cabins and wood, and maybe that could be something they could spotlight.
I think we're open to most anything. Yeah, that's another question? Yes, Lee?
When they moved the house, they went out, went to a right, came up Spring Creek and around, which was longer. Why didn't they go left up Windhaven and turn that way?
Because of the lights in the center of the street, the street wasn't wide enough. You got light poles, not lights. And in fact, when they got onto Spring Creek, they were on one side of Spring Creek going up it, and they had the same barrier. And so they had to back the house back down Spring Creek for about 50 or 100 yards, cross the median strip and get it on the other side in order to get the room to clear the house as it went down the street. Any other questions? Yes.
Just Rutledge, when you were doing your kind of research on the house itself, I mean, back in 1853 when it was built, I mean, what was out here? I mean, was there anything that was around the house?
Well, when my family came here, this was prairie land. Now they had to buy the property; it wasn't land grant, so they bought the property. And as I said, each tract was about 125 to 150 acres at the maximum. That was just about all one farmer with mules and hand tools could farm at one time. Now, as time went on, and I can go through it's interesting that while we were growing up and while I've been farming all my life, each of those 125 or 150 acre tracts has a name. And this was the Bush place. This was the Adams place. This was the Gregory place. This was the Shepherd place. Each of those tracts, and I still identify them by that means, the land that's left. And the reason I say that as when we were farming with mules, 125 to 150 acres, as machinery came in, as tractors came into being, and bigger equipment came into being. When I started farming in 1960, my dad was probably farming 300 acres, I guess, maybe 300 to 500 acres. My first year, I had 125 acres that was land that the Bush family had been running, that had been renting from my grandparents, and the Bush family left, and I took over that. And as years went on, and as times changed, and as tractors got bigger, and equipment got bigger, and combines got bigger and more expensive, you had to farm more land to make it work. And at one point in time, Owen and I, back, I guess, the early 70s, farming about 10,000 acres. And we were farming all the way into 75 up where the, what's there now? Where the drive-in theater was, the northeast corner of 175 and Parker Road. We went all the way into Frisco, going north. We pretty well stopped at the Plano Parkway, going south and going west, the railroad track back west of us. But over the years, as I said, for a number of years, that farming operation and cattle operation increased to about 10,000 acres at one time. And then what happened is the development started taking place, and I guess the saddest day of my life, I looked at each tract of land and the quality of the dirt that was in the land and the crops it would produce. And it was a block not too far from the house, and I could almost cry. I can remember it as well as if it were yesterday. It sold, and the people that sold came in and sodded in coastal Bermuda. Now, coastal Bermuda is good, but it sure did take some good farmland out of cultivation. And I think that was what kind of broke the ice with us, because as time went on, as years went on, the land sold and developed, and of course, piece by piece, we lost the land, and now we're down to less than 1,000 acres that we farm in the area. Any more questions?
So
Yes.
what was it like when you were growing up? What was your day like?
What was my day like when I was growing up? Went into this a little bit last week, but a day on the farm. I started tractors, and I can remember my dad using mules to farm. And I had a pony, a Shetland pony, whose name was Cricket. And when my dad would go out with the cultivator or the planter or whatever he's doing with the mules, he would saddle Cricket up. I'd get on Cricket, and he'd tie Cricket to the back of the plow, and I went up and down the roads with him every step of the way. So I've followed my dad in his footsteps ever since I can remember. Then when the tractors came into being, the first tractor that I can remember ever having driven was an F-30. It did not have rubber tires on it. It was lugs, and what you can imagine being on a tractor with lugs on it on a windy day when the wind's blowing about 20 miles an hour across the tractor and those lugs are throwing dirt in the air. It hurts. Also, what I remember about that tractor, because it had steel wheels on the front of it, if you hit a rut or a ridge or a rock or something, that drive shaft was direct to the wheels. And that steering wheel was a metal steering wheel, and you better get your hand out of the way because it was getting ready to spin like a top. And that's what I remember about that tractor. Growing up, I think I told a story last week. My mother and daddy, about the only time they went to town was to exchange butter and milk and things for flour and sugar and those type of things. I can remember begging them on a Saturday night, which we didn't go very often. Dad, can I go to the Rat Palace, or to the theater, and go to a movie? And they said absolutely no. So I can't remember when. Probably I was dating when I saw my first movie in the show. We had all the livestock. We had hogs and sheep and cows and a farming operation. And when you have animals, that's 7 days a week, 365 days a year, morning and night. So can remember that process. The process of before we had to, Mother and Daddy preserved and grew everything we ate with either the garden or through the livestock. And I think I told the story last week. I can remember when they used to kill a hog, and one way to cure the meat was to put it in a smokehouse with a smoking. And when you get ready to eat it, you go out and cut the green stuff off of it, which is penicillin, and go out and cut the meat off of it, and you got a ham. And I think we cherish those types of hams today, or at least we think we do when we go to Arkansas or somewhere and buy a cured ham that's supposedly smoke cured or something. The meat, the cattle, the beef end of it, didn't preserve that the same way. We had there was when I owned the first calves, I can remember calf I can remember butchering. They took it to a locker plant, and there were cold storage plants, and there was one at Preston and Park that I remember. They caught fire and burned up. I don't know why, but they were scattered around. And when we started butchering, having beef and preserving it, that was done in the locker plants. Mother always we always had a garden, and she canned and preserved everything that we grew in the garden. I started school. When I started to school, there were two bus routes that came out of Plano. One went east and one went west. And my cousin was the bus driver for the one that came west. I was the first on the bus and the last off of it. And he used to come to the house at least 10 or 15 minutes early before he needed to start his route and come in and drink a cup of coffee with Mother and Daddy in the mornings. But when I came home from school, there were the chores to do, the things, and then of course Saturdays and Sundays. And one thing that Susan probably doesn't understand sometime about me, but when you farm, it's sun up to sundown, and it was 6 days a week. We did not work on Sunday. It was 6 days a week. And you got to make hay while the sun shines. You've heard that expression. And if a holiday comes or a birthday comes or anniversary comes, or you don't stop. You got to keep going. So I pretty well grew up most of my life. I can remember a birthday party maybe when I was 4 or 5 years old. The next one I remember was when I was 50 years old. But farming life it's a great life, and one I wouldn't take anything for. Yes, Janice?
I have a question. I can't remember if it was on your dad's side of the family or one of the brothers, the story about Mammoth Jack, the big mule
There's a plaque in front of the office in Mammoth Jack.
on Mammoth
Yeah.
Jack.
You're relating to a story I'm not familiar with, Janice.
Oh,
The mule.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't remember the story that follows the big mule. But like I said, that was their business. That's what their livelihood when they first came here was mule trading. Yes, Randy.
You jogged my memory when you were talking about mules to tractors started coming out. When my dad had the Alice Chalmers tractor dealership in GMC trucks, Yeah, he told me he had actually taken mules in on trade for equipment.
Well, at that point in time, you had to, and I remember when Dad first bought his first tractor, we had, I don't think they were mules, they were actually horses at that point in time, which was a little more powerful than the mules. And when Dad bought his first tractor, he tried to trade the mules in, and they couldn't get anything for them. So I remember those mules staying on the place, and Dad did that several times. I've got an equipment graveyard that when we bought new equipment, and I'm the same way, I guess. When you buy new stuff, if you don't think they're getting enough stuff, you just keep it. Well, you have no business keeping it because there's no use for it, because you just bought something to take its place. So I remember the two horses that Dad had after we bought the tractors, and only time I can ever remember using them is you know what a Fresno is? Fresno is a scoop. It's got two handles on it. And you usually pull it with a set of horses because it's that strong. And if you need to clean out a ditch, or you need to dig a tank, or you need to do some dirt work, you take that scoop and you hold those two handles, and you'll fill that scoop full of dirt, and then you push down on the handles. That lets it slide on the ground, and then you take it to where you're going, and then you flip it. And that handle flips over, and you dump the dirt, and you go back and you do it again. That's the only thing I can remember the horses being used for after we bought the tractors. I started telling about school, and first off the bus, it was 10 miles to the Cox building downtown where we went to school. As I said, came home every afternoon and went to work. And it was because my mom and daddy were making me do this. For some reason, I'm not sure how I explain this, but I don't recall my mother and daddy ever telling me to do something. I just saw that it needed to be done and did it. And my kids can sit down beside me and watch me sweat. And if I ask them to help me, they will. But I don't know what I did wrong. But when I was growing up, I was right under my dad's feet, wanting to do and wanting to help. Whatever it is. The Barksdale Schoolhouse, that is an interesting story about it, and I still got blisters on my hands. What Dad did was, again, we were modernizing. And prior to the Barksdale School building being there, when we got seed wheat or sweet oats or whatever we were preserving, you got in the truck and you actually scooped it off with a hand scoop. That's the way you moved it from the truck into the granary. And Dad said, we're going to change this a little bit. So we bought the school building. He cut out the front of it, and he put an elevator in the middle of it. All he bought was the part at the bottom of the elevator and the part at the top of the elevator. The part in between he made out of wood, and we put screws in it. And I've still got blisters on my hands because that's before the days of screw guns and things, and so you had to screw them by hand. And we made that elevator. And that elevator is still in the barn down there. And the next thing Dad did